Hi, I'm Lori Thompson with Colorado Threadworks, and today we're talking about quilt labels. One of my goals this year is to label my quilts. I'm really kind of hit or miss about that. I'm usually excited about the other parts of the quilt, and the label's an afterthought. But I had an experience over the last couple of years that really changed my mind. I was able to travel the country and visit different quilt museums, and it was really fascinating to learn about these quilts, hear about the stories, who made them, the significance. And I realized a lot of that information came directly from the label, particularly on the really old quilts. Every once in a while, you'd go along an exhibit and you'd see one that said unknown. There was no information about it. And I thought that was really sad. There were some beautiful quilts that we had no information about. So that inspired me to start thinking more about labels and telling the stories of my quilts. So today, I'm going to label one of my first quilt finishes of the year. I'm jumping in on that goal. I'm inviting you along, and we're going to put on a quilt label today. All right, it's time to get the label on this quilt. Let me walk you through my process. So the first thing I did was I picked a label from this pre-printed yardage, and let me show you this great piece of fabric. Um, yeah, this is just many labels just printed all across this fabric. And the interesting thing about this fabric is I found it at my Quilt Guild's fall fabric fundraiser. I saw it on the table, snatched it up because I knew it would help me get many of my quilts labeled. All right, let's walk through how I'm going to put this label on. My first step was to practice writing my label because I'm the kind of person that when I send you a card or a letter, you're probably getting the third or fourth version of it. I've got so many ideas and it just takes me a little bit to sort through them. And I figured that would be how this process would go. So this is where I started, just a piece of scrap paper, all the facts that I thought were important for this label, and I started there. And the interesting thing about labels is that there are no rules. You can decide what you want to put on your quilt label. I think there's some key things to consider. I think you want to put your name, dates. I like to name my quilts. I think that's fun. And I think it's fun when you see other quilts that have a title and any other important information. So let's take a look at my second version. And I did that on an actual scrap fabric piece because I wanted to make sure I was comfortable writing on the fabric. So again, a little bit more information, less than that scrap paper, but still a good practice piece. And then my final, well, not quite my final, but my next step was to put it on an actual label. And if you can tell, I went ahead and I folded down the edges a 1/4 inch, pressed them down just so I had a nice folded edge as I sewed it down. But if you look at this label, that's still a whole lot of information packed onto this little piece of fabric. So I decided to pause, grab another label, and try again. This time I figured it out. So what I did is I picked a larger label and then I taped it down to a clipboard so that I was able to really take the time and try to do it as neatly as possible. So one thing I noticed when I was working on this is that the fabric shifted. So I would take my marker and I would just kind of hold the fabric and write on it, and that seemed to help. And I want to talk about the marker for a minute. I'm using a Micron 0.8 black marker. This is the marker that we used in Quilts of Valor, the Quilts of Valor Foundation. And I can tell you there are thousands and thousands of Quilts of Valor that have been inscribed with markers like this. I'm not affiliated with them, but it's just a good product. And I know it'll hold up as the quilt is worn and washed. All right, let's work on getting this label on the quilt. First, I want to show you the quilt. This was a really fun one, a quick, easy quilt for me. It's from a pattern called Fat Quarter Mixer from Material Girl Quilts, and it was a great way to use some of my favorite fat quarter fabrics. So just loved how it turned out. I'm going to go ahead and put my quilt label in the right lower corner. There's no right place where to put it, but for me, that's where I've chosen to put it. So let's go ahead and get this label pinned on. I already put some pens in to help me find that corner. All right, I'm grabbing my label. I like to use safety pens when I'm putting on my labels. I have stabbed myself a lot with regular pens, and I'm all for less pain when it comes to quilting and sewing. So let me pin this in place. And I'm not too worried about penning it right on that 1/4 inch fold. I want that to be a little bit loose so I can stitch it down, but I want to make sure that this label is secure in place. All right, let me just change that a little bit, kind of straighten that up. Now, some folks like to go ahead and stitch their labels in their binding. That is an option too. For me, my goal is just to keep it easy and get it on the quilt today. All right, let's stitch this label down. The first thing I did is I prepared my needle and thread, and I'm using 2 strands of thread for durability. I'm going to start at the corner of this label, take a tiny stitch, secure that with my knot. I'm going to do another stitch in that spot. Then I'm going to run my thread through the loop just to create another knot to secure that more. All right. And then I'm going to start with a stitch that's kind of a combination whip stitch and blind stitch. This is how I like to sew my labels down. And of course, sometimes you get those funny little loops. You got to pull on them. But what I'm doing, like a whip stitch, is I'm just taking a tiny stitch here to secure it. And then I'm going to slide my needle along the fold of the fabric, like the blind stitch. And take another stitch and just continue down the row. Just double check my label position, make sure that's tucked under. All right. And this is slow stitching. It's just fun to sit down, take a little bit of time, take the stitches, and just relax. Just tightening it as I go, just to make sure there's no loops, that it's secure. Just checking the tension a little bit. So far, so good. Coming up to the corner, I want to make sure that my needle's right in that corner. I'm going to take a stitch right there to secure that. Then I'm going to turn it slightly. It's lined up pretty well. I'm going to turn that corner. And as you can tell, I'm not in a hurry. I'm just enjoying this, just making sure I'm getting the needle and thread where I want it. Kind of pulling out some of those loops. Oh, my thread's starting to get knotted up. So we're going to just kind of pull on that gently. And then I'm going to go ahead and just check the rest of it. We're good to go. Although I'm taking my time today and enjoying this label, I have learned how to sew on labels really quickly. Last fall, I was part of a Quilt of Valor award ceremony at the National Quilt Museum, and we were presenting quilts that were part of a special exhibit. And out of the 24 quilts only 4 of them had labels on it, and we had 30 minutes to get a label on it and get them ready for the ceremony. Most of the time you can plan ahead for those, but that was a challenging situation. So the 4 of us jumped in, started stitching down labels, and we got them done with time to spare. But sometimes learning under duress can provide some really good lessons. All right, we're going to keep working down this edge. I don't get the opportunity to hand stitch a lot, but I do enjoy it when I'm able to do it. I know many people enjoy slow stitching, which that's what this is. I often like to do hand-bound quilts. I'll, of course, sew the binding on with my machine and then turn it over and stitch down the edge by hand, which I did on this quilt. And when I get to that point, I'm usually in my recliner, I'm watching a good TV show or movie for a few hours, and then my husband often will comment on how I'm enjoying quilt dessert. So I think any time that you're able to do some hand stitching, you get to enjoy some quilt dessert. All right, we're just working our way along. I think I can go ahead and take out this safety pin as it's continuing to get caught on that. Not a big deal, and just make that adjustment. All right, I'm going to go ahead and take a little stitch there and then go in the corner and secure it. I think more is better in this case. All right. See if I can get that little loop out. If not, I'll just tuck it under. It'll be fine. All right, we're going to turn. Just kind of check the position of the label. I still think I'm fine. Make sure that edge is just tucked under and just continue. Go ahead and get my stitch in that corner. For a long time, I was really self-conscious about my hand stitching. My mother was great at hand stitching, embroidery, all those handicrafts, and I didn't always like the way my work looked. But I decided when I started quilting, I was just going to enjoy the process. And I've come to really just enjoy having the stitches and let it be mine. Even if the stitches are a little wonky. Let me go ahead and straighten some of those out. Oops. Well, that happens too. Not a big deal. So what we're going to do, we're going to go back and we'll go ahead and knot this thread. I'm going to take it back about 1 inch. I'm going to take the thread out here. Oh, I may actually have to get some beeswax this next time. If your thread starts knotting up like this, you can use beeswax to help create a smooth finish on that. All right, let's go ahead and triage this just a little bit. We'll see how well I really stitched it down. How easy it is to get those stitches out will tell me how secure they are. So, all right, I did a really good job stitching them down. So, and this happens in hand stitching too. Like I said, not a big deal. All right, I just want to get about 1.5 inches worth of the thread kind of ripped back so that I can knot it, make sure it's secure. And then we'll set up a new needle and thread and just continue. Yeah, it's getting a little easier right there. Those corners can be a little tricky. I think just a couple more stitches and then I'm ready. All right. little bit of moisture. I'm going to trim that edge just so it's good and even. And then rethread my needle. All right, I've got a little bit of a tail there, which will help. And then I'm just going to stitch and knot it like I did when I started the row. I'm also going to try not to stab myself. That would be helpful. All right, we'll go there. And then I usually just stitch it under a little bit, pull the threads out, and trim. All right, we lost a little bit of what we stitched, but it's better to have it look really nice and neat and have it be durable. So let's go ahead and thread the needle again. And sometimes one of the great mysteries is where the thread starts on the spool. I always have a hard time sometimes finding it. All right. Got it threaded. I'm going to go ahead and knot it. I've been trying to learn a quilter's knot, which is not what I'm doing right now. I'm just doing a basic knot. I still need to practice on that. I will learn how to do that and share that another day. But it's always fun. There's always something for us to learn, I think, no matter where we're at in our quilting journey. All right, we've got our spot secured there, and we're just going to start about 1/8 or 1/4 inch down. There we go. We're going to go ahead and do the loop and pull the needle through like we did at the start, just to secure. And then we'll continue on. We're headed to that corner. And again, I'm going to do that securing stitch right there in that corner. And then I'll just continue along. As I shared earlier, you know, the label that's on here is actually the 4th version of the information that I was writing down. But I'm pretty happy with what I included. I named this quilt Boho Grand Lake because I made it at a friend's quilt retreat. There's a group of us that go up to Grand Lake, Colorado once a year, usually in the fall, and we'll quilt for 3-4 days. We do a lot of quilting, eating, and quilt shopping. And this quilt is just a fun memory of this year's retreat. So I'm excited to include that information. I do have to smile though. I think someday, I don't know that this will be in a museum, but if somebody's finding the quilt or wondering, you know, about the story, they'll be like, what the heck is the Friends Quilt Retreat? But hopefully they understand that it was a time when we got together and we had a good time and we got to do something we love. So thinking about that just makes me smile. Alrighty, we're getting close. We're finishing up. Let's see, do I need to do a stitch? I've got one there. So I'm just going to go through that fold. I'm actually going to flip the quilt back around. Yep, there we go. And I think I'm where I started, but I want to try to get in a position where I'm comfortable stitching. Got a loop there, tug on it a bit. All right, good to go. All right, just checking that edge, make sure it's folded under and tucked in. Go on to the corner. We're going to secure this corner as well. All right, we'll do this final edge. I'm going to go ahead and take the safety pin out because this label is secured at this point. Just kind of watching my tension on it. Making sure that edge is tucked. And this is exciting. We're getting close to the end of the label. This is the final step for this quilt. If you think about where every quilt begins, it begins with an idea, then it begins with fabric, and you cut those pieces of fabric and then you put them back together. And then you quilt it with the quilt batting and the backing. You choose the stitching and the thread. And by the time you get to this point, the quilt has gone through quite a journey. And to me, that's always exciting. And that's a part of the story. All right, yep. Got a tiny little knot there. Sometimes when you get those, you can just take your needle. And sometimes when you get to the edge of the quilt, it gets a little stubborn. That's just part of the process, but you got to work with it. And maybe I'm just getting excited because it's fun to have a new quilt done. It's fun to have one of these first quilts of the year done. I'm just going to tuck that loop under. All right, we got our last 2 stitches. Let's go ahead and take that. Oh, this is getting exciting. We're towards the end of this project. The last stitch. Oops. There we go. Get my loop so I can secure it. All right, I'm going to tuck it under. I'm going to trim it. All right, let's take a look. Let me flip this around. All right. As you can see, it's a simple label, but it's got the information that's important to me that I'm excited to share and to tell this quilt story. So yeah, I'm off to a great start for this year's goal. If you liked what you saw today and you were inspired, go ahead and like and subscribe. And thanks for joining me today. I hope that you'll label your quilts this year.